Good evening, everyone. Tonight we step into a world where physicians believe that every secret of the human body could be read through a single flask. Our story explores how medieval urine doctors diagnosed everything, from fevers to heartbreak, simply by holding a golden sample up to the light. Before we begin today's video, I could really use your help. Our channel's reach has dipped a little, and subscribing is one of the best ways to support us. It's free, it takes only a moment, and it allows us to keep bringing you curious and captivating stories from history. Thank you so much. Now let's begin. And please, write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see our little community on the map. Now turn down the lights, switch on a fan if you have one for that gentle ambience, and let's wander together into the dim chambers of medieval diagnosis. I was 15 years old when I first held another man's essence in my hands and pretended to understand it. The flask was warm still, wrapped in coarse linen, and through the glass I could see the amber liquid catching the morning light that fell through the narrow window of my master's chamber. Master Philippus stood behind me, breathing slowly through his mouth as old men do, and waited for me to speak. I knew nothing, but I had watched him for 3 months, had seen how he held the vessel up to the light, how he swirled it gently, how he brought it close to his face and inhaled with closed eyes. So I did the same, and the smell that met me was warm and sharp and human, and I said what I had heard him say a dozen times before. The humours are disturbed, the choler rises, a purging draught of wormwood and honey will restore the balance. The patient, a wool merchant from Bruges with a face like tanned leather, nodded slowly and reached for his purse. Master Philippus said nothing until the man had gone, his coin left behind on the wooden table beside the colour wheel we used to chart the gradations of health and sickness. Then my master turned to me and asked if I had truly seen what I claimed to see, or if I had merely repeated words I had learned by rote. I told him I had seen the cloudiness in the sample, the faint sediment at the bottom, the yellowish cast that spoke of heat within. He studied me for a long moment, then picked up the flask and held it to the window. The light turned the liquid golden, almost beautiful, and he said, "You saw what you expected to see because I have taught you to expect it. But did you see what was actually there?" I did not understand him then. I was young, and certainty seemed like wisdom. I am old now, past 70 winters, and I understand that he was trying to warn me, that the golden water we studied was both truth and mirror, and which of the two we saw depended less on the sample than on ourselves. But I did not listen. I learned his craft with the eagerness of youth, memorized the 20 colours of the urine wheel, the thickness that spoke of kidney troubles, the sweetness that foretold the wasting disease, the cloudiness that meant corruption somewhere deep within. I learned to hold the flask at precisely the right angle to catch the light, to swirl it with just enough motion to raise the sediment without disturbing it too much, to bring it close to my nose and breathe in the scent of another person's inner workings, as if I were reading their very soul. This was in the year of our Lord 1347, in the city of Montpellier, where the university had been teaching the art of medicine for more than a century. Master Philippus had studied there in his youth, learned from men who had learned from the great Arabic physicians, who had themselves preserved the wisdom of the ancients. He owned 3 precious books, their pages of vellum covered in careful script, 1 in Latin and 2 in Arabic, that he could not read but kept because they contained diagrams of the body's inner landscape. On winter evenings he would open these books by candlelight and show me the drawings, the network of vessels that carried the humours, the organs where they were generated or corrupted, the points where letting could release the excess that caused disease. But it was the golden water that fascinated him most. He would speak of it with something approaching reverence, this substance that the body produced constantly, that carried within it traces of everything occurring in the hidden places beneath the skin. The colour spoke of heat or cold, moisture or dryness, the balance or imbalance of the 4 humours. The clarity spoke of the kidney's health, the bladder's function. The smell could indicate fever, corruption, the wasting that came from within. The taste, and yes, we tasted it, touching a clean finger to the sample and bringing it to the tongue, could reveal sweetness that meant certain decline, bitterness that spoke of bile, saltiness that indicated the drying of the body's natural moisture. Would you have believed it? that a man's fate could be read in the amber liquid he passed each morning? We believed it absolutely. It was not superstition to us, but science, built on centuries of observation and theory. The body was a vessel containing 4 essential humours, and these humours must be in balance for health to persist. When they became unbalanced, either through bad air, improper diet, emotional disturbance, or the alignment of celestial bodies, illness followed as surely as night follows day. And the golden water, being a direct product of the blood's filtration, carried within it the evidence of this imbalance more clearly than any other sign. I remember the first time I tasted a sample and recognised the sweetness that spoke of the wasting disease. The patient was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, the daughter of a mercer who had brought her because she had been growing thin despite eating well, because she was always thirsty, because she rose 3 or 4 times each night to pass water. Master Philippus had her sample brought to us in a covered flask, still warm. He held it to the light first, noted its pale yellow colour, its perfect clarity. Then he removed the stopper and inhaled, and I saw his face change, a flicker of something that might have been sorrow crossing his features. He handed the flask to me and told me to smell it, and I did, and there was a faint sweetness beneath the usual sharp scent, like honey that had been diluted in water. Then he told me to taste it. I hesitated. We did not taste every sample, only those where the smell and colour did not reveal enough. But he nodded, and I touched my smallest finger to the liquid and brought it to my tongue, and the sweetness was unmistakable. Not strong, but present, and wrong in a way I cannot fully describe. It was the taste of something that should not be sweet becoming sweet, as if the body were turning itself into honey, consuming itself from within. Master Philippus confirmed what I had tasted. The young woman, he said, had the wasting that came from the liver's failure to properly transform the humours. The sweetness in her water meant her body was unable to retain its proper moisture, was leaking it away constantly, and no treatment we possessed could reverse this process. We could make her more comfortable, could give her herbs to strengthen her and reduce her thirst, but the inward disorder would continue until her time concluded. He sent word to her father, along with instructions for a preparation of sage and cinnamon to ease her suffering. She faded from the world 6 months later. I never met her, never saw her face, but I have remembered the taste of her water for 70 years. This is what we did. This is what I became. A man who studied the golden water of strangers and claimed to see their fates written there. I apprenticed with Master Philippus for 5 years, until the great dying came to Montpellier in 1352, and took him along with 1/3 of the city. By then I had learned everything he could teach me, had memorized the colour wheel and the significance of each shade from pale as morning mist to dark as old amber, had trained my nose to detect the subtle variations in scent that might indicate fever or corruption, had become practiced enough to taste a sample and identify its qualities without flinching. I'd attended him on visits to wealthy patients in their homes, carrying the precious flasks wrapped in linen, and I had sat in his chamber as a constant stream of people brought their samples to be read, peasants and merchants and occasionally nobility, all believing that we could see what they could not. After Master Philippus concluded his time in this world, I took over his practice. I was 20 years old, young for a physician, but I had his books and his instruments and his reputation, and the university granted me license to continue his work. I kept his chamber as he had arranged it, the wooden table beneath the window where the light was best, the shelves with their rows of flasks, the colour wheel hanging on the wall where we could consult it easily, the small brass scale for weighing ingredients, the mortar and pestle for grinding herbs. I kept his hours too, seeing patients from dawn until midday, when the light began to fade and reading the samples became more difficult. They came to me as they had come to him, carrying their flasks like offerings, wrapped carefully against the cold or heat. Some brought them in glass, which was expensive, but allowed me to see the contents most clearly. Others used glazed pottery, which kept the sample warmer but obscured the colour. The poorest brought them in whatever vessel they had, wooden cups, leather bottles, even hollowed gourds. I learned to read them all, to account for how the container might affect the appearance, to focus on the essential qualities rather than the superficial ones. The process was always the same. I would take the vessel and unwrap it, noting first its warmth or coolness. which spoke of how recently it had left the body. Then I would hold it up to the window, let the light pass through it, observe its colour against the white wall behind. I would swirl it gently, watching how it moved, whether sediment rose or remained at the bottom, whether foam appeared at the surface. Then I would remove the stopper or cover and inhale, breathing in the scent that spoke of the body's inner state. And finally, if necessary, I would taste it, touching a clean finger to the surface and bringing it to my tongue. Tell me, would you have done this? Would you have brought another person's essence to your lips, believing it would reveal their hidden ailments? We did not think of it as unpleasant. It was necessary, like a surgeon examining a wound or a barber feeling for swollen glands. The golden water was simply another text to be read, another language spoken by the body, and we had trained ourselves to understand its grammar. I remember the first time I recognised my own uncertainty. It was perhaps a year after I had taken over Master Philippus's practice, and a young monk from the abbey had been sent to me by his abbot. The monk was suffering from headaches and a general weakness, and he brought his morning sample in a small glass flask that caught the light beautifully. I performed my examination as I had been taught, held the flask to the window, noted its pale yellow colour and perfect clarity, swirled it and saw no sediment, inhaled and detected nothing unusual, even tasted it and found it unremarkable. By all the signs I had learned, this man's humours were in perfect balance, and yet he was unwell. I gave him a strengthening tonic of rosemary and wine, told him to avoid cold drinks and draughty chambers, and sent him back to the abbey. He returned 2 weeks later, no better, with another sample that appeared equally healthy. I examined it again, more carefully this time, holding it at different angles to the light, searching for some subtle variation I might have missed. But there was nothing. The golden water was perfect, textbook in its clarity and colour, and yet the man remained ill. I consulted Master Philippus's books that evening, reading by candlelight in the chamber that had been his and was now mine. I found descriptions of obscure imbalances, of conditions where the visible signs might not match the inner disorder, of cases where treatment must proceed on faith rather than evidence. But I found no clear answer, and lying in my narrow bed that night, listening to the rats moving in the walls, I wondered for the first time whether the golden water truly revealed what we claimed it revealed, or whether we had simply convinced ourselves that it did. The monk recovered eventually, though, whether from my treatments or despite them I could not say. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and though I tried to ignore it, though I continued my practice with the same careful rituals and confident pronouncements, it grew slowly over the years that followed. I began to notice things I had not noticed before. I saw how 2 samples that appeared identical could come from patients with entirely different complaints. I saw how a sample that indicated certain imbalance might come from someone who felt perfectly well, while a person in obvious distress might produce water that appeared completely healthy. I saw how my own mood and tiredness could affect what I perceived, how on days when I was alert and rested, I might detect subtle variations I missed when I was weary, or worse, how I might imagine variations that were not truly there. But I said nothing. I continued to practice as I had been taught, because what else could I do? I had devoted my life to this art, had studied for years to master it, had built my reputation on my ability to read the body's inner workings through the golden water. To admit doubt would be to admit that perhaps all of it was built on sand, that perhaps we saw what we wanted to see rather than what was actually there. And perhaps in some cases we were right. Perhaps the sweetness I tasted in that young woman's sample truly did indicate the wasting disease that took her months later. Perhaps the darkness in another patient's water truly did speak of the kidney corruption that concluded his time within the year. Or perhaps these things would have occurred regardless, and we simply learned to recognize the patterns after the fact, to connect the signs we saw with the outcomes we witnessed, and convinced ourselves that the connection meant causation. I travelled more in those years as my reputation grew. I was called to attend patients in other cities, in monasteries and manor houses, sometimes journeying for days to examine a single influential person's sample. I carried with me a leather case containing several glass flasks of different sizes, a small colour wheel painted on vellum, and a wooden box holding the herbs and compounds I might need to prepare treatments. I travelled with a servant who carried my books and helped manage the practical matters of the journey. These travels showed me that the art of reading the golden water was practiced differently in different places. In Paris, the physicians relied more heavily on astronomical calculations, believing that the position of the planets at the moment the sample was produced could affect its qualities. In Bologna, they emphasized the importance of the patient's diet and lifestyle, asking detailed questions about what had been eaten and drunk in the days before. In the German territories, some healers added prayers and blessings to the examination, believing that spiritual influences could affect the body's humours as strongly as physical ones. I met other practitioners, some learned and thoughtful, others clearly fraudulent. There was a healer in Lyon who claimed he could diagnose any ailment from smell alone, who would hold the flask beneath his nose for barely a moment before pronouncing judgment. I watched him work and saw that his pronouncements were vague enough to apply to almost anyone, that he relied more on reading the patient's face and bearing than on examining the sample itself. Yet his patients believed in him absolutely, and many claimed they were helped by his treatments. There was an old woman in Avignon who read the golden water by holding the flask against her forehead and closing her eyes, claiming she could sense the disturbances in the humours through some inner vision. I thought her a charlatan until I saw her correctly identify a pregnancy before the woman herself was certain of it, saw her predict the development of a fever that appeared 2 days later, exactly as she had described. Was she truly sensing something, or had she simply learned to observe the subtle signs that others missed? I could not say. And there were the university physicians, trained as I had been, who approached the golden water with the same careful methodology, the same charts and colour wheels and diagnostic procedures. Yet, even among these learned men, I noticed differences. What one would call pale yellow, another might call greenish. What one detected as a faint sweetness, another might not taste at all. We were all examining the same substance, using the same techniques, and yet we did not always arrive at the same conclusions. I began to understand that what we were doing was not quite the objective science we claimed it was. Yes, there were real differences in the samples we examined, differences in colour and clarity and scent that were not imaginary. But the interpretation of these differences, the connection between what we observed and what we concluded about the patient's condition, this was more art than science, more intuition than knowledge. We had convinced ourselves that we could read the body's inner workings in the golden water, but perhaps what we were really reading was our own expectations, our own theories about how the body functioned and what might be wrong with it. Yet I could not abandon the practice. It was my livelihood, my identity, the thing I had spent my life learning. And there were moments when it did seem to work, when I examined a sample and prescribed a treatment and the patient improved, and in those moments I could convince myself that whatever doubts I harboured were simply the result of my own inadequate understanding, that the art was sound even if I was not fully its master. I remember examining the golden water of a nobleman from Toulouse who had been suffering from a persistent cough and weakness. The sample was cloudy, with a reddish tint that spoke of corruption somewhere in the lungs or throat. I prescribed a treatment of hyssop and licorice, with regular inhalations of steam infused with eucalyptus. 3 weeks later, word came that the nobleman had recovered completely, that the cough had ceased and his strength had returned. Had my treatment cured him, or would he have recovered anyway? Had I truly seen evidence of lung corruption in his water, or had I simply made a lucky guess based on his symptoms? I could not know, and the not knowing gnawed at me. The years passed. I continued my practice, examining hundreds of samples, treating dozens of patients, building a reputation as a skilled physician. I took on apprentices of my own, young men eager to learn the art, and I taught them as Master Philippus had taught me. The colours and their meanings, the significance of clarity and cloudiness, the importance of scent and taste, the proper way to hold the flask to catch the light. I showed them the colour wheel, explained the theory of the four humours, demonstrated the techniques that generations of physicians had developed and refined, and I tried not to pass on my doubts along with my knowledge. One of my apprentices was a boy named Thomas, the son of an apothecary, bright and curious and determined to understand everything. He learned quickly, mastered the technical aspects of the examination in months rather than years, and soon was as skilled as I had been at his age. But he asked questions that I had not asked, or that I had learned not to ask. Why did two patients with similar samples sometimes respond differently to the same treatment? Why did some people with apparently healthy water still suffer from ailments, while others with clearly disturbed samples remained vigorous? How could we be certain that what we observed in the flask truly corresponded to what was occurring inside the body, where we could not see? I told him what I had been told, that the art was complex, that there were subtleties he would understand only with experience, that not every case followed the expected pattern, but that the overall principles were sound. But I saw in his eyes the same doubt I had felt, and I knew I was perpetuating something I was no longer sure I believed in. It was Thomas who first suggested that we test our methods more rigorously. He proposed that we examine samples without knowing anything about the patient's symptoms, to see whether we could truly diagnose their ailments from the golden water alone. I refused, telling him that the examination must be understood in context, that the sample was only one piece of evidence that must be combined with observation of the patient and knowledge of their circumstances. But he persisted, and eventually I agreed to a small trial. We arranged for several patients to send samples through intermediaries, so that we would not know who they came from or what complaints they suffered. We examined each sample carefully, applied all our art to reading its qualities, and recorded our conclusions. Then we compared our diagnoses to the actual ailments. We were wrong more often than we were right. Not entirely wrong. We could usually identify gross abnormalities, like the sweetness that indicated wasting disease, or the darkness that spoke of serious kidney disorder. But the subtle distinctions we claimed to make, the precise diagnoses based on slight variations in colour or clarity or scent, these proved unreliable. Two samples that appeared nearly identical might come from patients with entirely different complaints. A sample we judged to be healthy might come from someone seriously ill, while one we identified as disturbed might come from someone who felt perfectly well. Thomas wanted to abandon the practice entirely, to admit that we had been deceiving ourselves and our patients. I could not bring myself to go so far. I argued that our test had been too limited, that we had not accounted for various factors that might affect the results, that with more practice and better methods we could improve our accuracy. But in my heart, I knew he was right. We were not reading the body's inner workings in the golden water. We were reading our own theories and expectations, and sometimes, by chance or by unconscious observation of other clues, we happened to be correct. Yet what was the alternative? If we could not trust the examination of the golden water, which had been the foundation of medical practice for centuries, what could we trust? The idea that all our learning, all our careful study and meticulous technique might be built on false premises was too terrible to fully accept. So I continued, and I taught Thomas to continue, though with less confidence than before, with a growing sense that we were actors playing roles we no longer believed in. I am old now, as I said. My hands shake too much to hold the flask steady. My eyes cannot discern the subtle variations in colour that once seemed so clear. My sense of smell has faded until I can barely detect anything at all. I have not examined a sample in 5 years. I sit in this same chamber where Master Philippus once taught me, where I once taught apprentices of my own, and I look at the colour wheel still hanging on the wall, faded now, its careful gradations from pale to dark seeming suddenly arbitrary, like the map of a country that never existed. Did we help anyone? Perhaps. The treatments we prescribed, the herbs and draughts, the changes in diet, the rest and careful living, these might have provided some benefit, regardless of whether our diagnoses were correct. The attention we paid to our patients, the belief we gave them that someone understood their suffering and could help, this might have had its own healing power. Or perhaps not. Perhaps we did nothing at all except charge money for examining something we did not truly understand, and making confident pronouncements about matters we could not possibly know. I think of that young woman whose sweetness I tasted, whose name I never learned. Did she die because I was right about what her golden water revealed? Or did she die for reasons that had nothing to do with what I observed in that flask, and I simply constructed a narrative afterwards that made it seem as though I had known all along? I cannot say. She is gone, has been gone for 60 years, and the taste of her water has faded from my tongue but not from my memory. I think of all the people who came to me with their flasks wrapped in linen, who entrusted me with their hopes and fears, who believed I could see into their bodies and tell them what was wrong. I think of how I swirled those flasks, held them to the light, inhaled their scent, even brought them to my lips, all with the absolute confidence of someone who knew what he was doing. And I think of how little I actually knew, how much I was simply performing a ritual that gave the appearance of knowledge without its substance. Would you have done differently? If you had been taught as I was taught, if you had seen what appeared to be patterns and connections, if your livelihood and identity depended on maintaining the practice, would you have questioned it sooner or more thoroughly than I did? I would like to think that I should have recognized the truth earlier and had the courage to speak it. But I did not, and I think most men in my position did not, because the alternative was too frightening, too disorienting. We needed to believe that we understood what we were doing, that our art was real and not merely performance. There are younger physicians now who practice differently. They rely less on the examination of the golden water, focus more on direct observation of the patient's body, on careful recording of symptoms and outcomes, on testing treatments to see what actually works rather than what theory suggests should work. They study anatomy from direct examination of the bodies of those who have concluded their time, rather than from ancient texts and speculation. They are building something new, something that might actually be knowledge rather than the illusion of knowledge. But they too could be wrong. They too might be constructing elaborate theories that future generations will look back on with pity or amusement, wondering how we could have believed such things. This is the nature of human understanding. We see patterns, we construct explanations, we convince ourselves we have grasped the truth, and then time reveals our certainty to have been premature or misguided. Perhaps this will always be so. Perhaps every generation of healers will believe they have finally discovered the real workings of the body, only to be proven wrong by their successors. I do not know what happens after our time concludes. Master Philippus believed the soul departed the body and faced judgment for the life it had lived. I hope this is true because I would like to stand before that judgment and confess what I did, the uncertainty I harboured but did not speak, the treatments I prescribed with confidence I did not truly feel, the people who may have been harmed by my ignorance disguised as knowledge. And I would like to be told that I am forgiven, that I did what I could with what I knew, that the failing was in the art itself and not entirely in me. But perhaps there is no judgment, no accounting, no forgiveness or condemnation. Perhaps we simply fade as that young woman faded, as Master Philippus faded, as all those whose golden water I examined have faded, and there is nothing after except the slow forgetting, in which case this confession is pointless, a catalogue of doubts addressed to no one, like speaking into a flask and hearing only the echo of my own voice. The flask sits on the table before me now. It is empty, has been empty for years, but I keep it there because it reminds me of everything I was and believed and discovered I was not. Sometimes, when the afternoon light falls through the window at the right angle, I hold it up and look through it, and the world beyond is tinted amber, made strange and beautiful by that golden filter. And I think how easy it is to mistake beauty for truth, to see what we wish to see rather than what is actually there. If you were to bring me your golden water now, wrapped in linen, still warm from your body, I would tell you that I cannot read it. I would tell you that I spent 50 years claiming to understand what it revealed, and I no longer believe I understood anything at all. I would tell you that the colour and clarity and scent might mean something, or might mean nothing, that the human body is more mysterious than we imagined, that the certainty I once possessed was the certainty of ignorance rather than knowledge. Would you believe me? Or would you turn to another healer, one who still possesses that confidence, who will hold your flask to the light and tell you exactly what is wrong and how to fix it? I think you would turn away. People do not come to healers for uncertainty. They come for answers, for assurance, for someone to tell them that their suffering has meaning and can be addressed. And so, the next healer will examine your golden water with the same rituals and pronouncements, and you will believe in them as my patients believed in me. And perhaps that belief itself will help you, regardless of whether their knowledge is real. This is what I have learned after 70 years, that we are all looking for truth in things that cannot contain it, reading meaning into patterns that may be nothing more than chance, constructing elaborate theories to explain what we do not understand. The Golden Water was our book, and we convinced ourselves we could read it, but perhaps it was written in a language we never actually learned, or perhaps it contained no message at all, was simply water that the body produced and expelled. Nothing more, nothing less. I am tired now. The afternoon light is fading, and soon the servant will come to light the candles, though my eyes are too weak now to read by candlelight as I once did. The colour wheel still hangs on the wall, its gradations from pale to dark, still carefully marked and labelled, each shade supposedly corresponding to a different state of the humours, a different diagnosis, a different treatment. It is as precise and detailed as I could make it, based on decades of observation and study, and it is probably meaningless, a monument to effort expended in pursuit of something that was never there to be found. Would you have spent your life differently knowing this? Would you have questioned earlier, abandoned the practice, sought some other way to help those who suffered? I've asked myself these questions countless times, and I still have no answer. We do what we can with what we know, or what we think we know, and we hope that we do more good than harm, and we live with the uncertainty as best we can. The flask catches the last of the afternoon light, glows amber for a moment, then fades to ordinary glass as the sun moves behind the buildings across the street. Empty now, clear, revealing nothing except its own transparency. Perhaps that is the truth I should have seen from the beginning, that the vessel was empty all along, that what I thought I saw there was only the reflection of my own certainty staring back at me, hollow and afraid to breathe. Tomorrow they will come again, the people with their flasks and their suffering, and the young physicians will examine them as I once did, with confidence and careful ritual, and they will make their pronouncements and prescribe their treatments. And I will sit here in this chamber that has seen 70 years of such examinations, and I will say nothing, because what is there to say? That I devoted my life to reading a text that may not have been written, that the Golden Water revealed nothing except our own desire to believe we understood things we did not. The truth, if it exists at all, is bitter, and I have swallowed it.